For almost 4 centuries, the British Army has played a pivotal role in the life of the Caribbean. The many wars between the great powers of Europe spread to their West Indian colonies. This is a story of 2 parts: the trials endured by British soldiers in the Caribbean, and the role West Indians have played in the history of the British Army. Life for the British soldiers serving in the Caribbean in centuries past was extremely tough and dangerous. Fighting in what was referred to as the Torrid Zone, with dense woodlands and rugged landscapes coupled with extreme heat and humidity, proved lethal for thousands of soldiers. Worse still, disease was a constant threat. Illnesses including dysentery, elephantiasis, malaria and yellow fever claimed countless lives.
In order to cope with these stresses of serving in the Caribbean, many soldiers turned to the bottle. However, this cheap rum was in effect really moonshine, created using lead distilling equipment which poisoned the drink itself. Many men thus met their ends of lead poisoning long before they contracted any other form of disease or met the enemy in battle.
The presence of thousands of British soldiers had a great effect on the development of life in the Caribbean. Several British soldiers settled in the Caribbean, and many families can now trace their descent from these men.
The most prominent family would be that of Mary Seacole, whose father was a Scottish captain in the British Army. Typical of their type, the soldiers were very proud of their partners and of their children. Another example is that of the family of Dwayne Brooks, OBE, who can trace his ancestors back to one of Cromwell's soldiers who captured Jamaica back in 1655, taking it from the Spanish. One final example, of course, is the Cayman Islands, where the Boddens and the Wattlers are allegedly direct descendants of British deserters from the army.
The British Army built many famous landmarks on the islands, which remain today, such as the Garrison Historic Area in Barbados and the impressive fortifications at Brimstone Hill in St. Kitts. Both of these are recognised as UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
The British Army left an indelible mark on the culture and the language of the Caribbean. The built heritage was very much evident. They even scraped entire volcanoes off islands such as St. Kitts and replaced them with huge fortifications such as Brimstone Hill. In terms of language, I mean, even I was raised speaking Georgian military English. So terms such as dress over, which basically means shift to the left or to the right when you're on parade, were used normally in my family. Blazing off, which is when you forge ahead and your soldiers follow behind you. And of course one which is used far too often in our house, and that is that you are hardened, meaning battle hardened.
Many West Indians also travelled to Britain and joined the army themselves. Wealthy white West Indian families bought their sons officers' positions. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, many British regiments recruited Caribbean men into their regimental bands. Those serving in the Guards Regiment stationed in London were given flamboyant costumes based on those worn by musicians in the Turkish Ottoman Empire, and they became an everyday sight at the daily changing of the guard. Other Caribbean musicians saw combat, including engagements such as the Battle of Waterloo. By the mid-19th century, many such soldiers had settled in Britain, becoming part of the early black community.
Contrary to popular belief, there were black soldiers serving as officers in the British Army over 100 years before Walter Tull and his contemporaries in the First World War. The most prominent among these was one William Ferguson, a Jamaican. He was sent by his father at a young age to study medicine in Edinburgh. He graduated from the Royal College of Surgeons in 1813 and went immediately into the army, where he had a successful 30-year-long career, eventually culminating in his appointment as governor of the British colony of Sierra Leone.
Back in the West Indies, the huge death toll among British soldiers at the end of the 18th century led the army to consider creating new regiments to serve in the region.
Over the course of the 18th century, British soldiers died from disease in their thousands in the Caribbean. However, doctors at the time recognised that the black population of the Caribbean proved to be far more resistant to these lethal diseases. By the 1790s and the French Revolutionary Wars, the death toll among the British Army had reached the point where Lieutenant General Sir John Vaughan proposed the creation of a new set of regiments, one drawn from the largest single population body in the Caribbean, namely the black slave population.
The army purchased some 13,000 slaves between 1796 and 1807 to form these regiments, making them one of the largest slave owners in history. At the same time, the army worked to ensure these men were regarded as soldiers, not slaves. They were paid the same as white soldiers, treated in the same hospitals, and subject to the same military discipline. General Sir Ralph Abercrombie declared that when they were no longer fit for service, they should be regarded as free men. The local Caribbean governments, fearing armed black soldiers, ignored Abercrombie and continued to treat them as slaves. This argument became a legal question. Were the men of the West India regiments now free by virtue of their service? The debate continued until 1807, when an Act of Parliament declared that all men serving in the army were free men. The West India regiments fulfilled their purpose, as black soldiers proved more effective than their white counterparts, fighting against the French in the Caribbean climate during the Napoleonic Wars. They continued to serve with distinction throughout the 19th century. In the Caribbean, they were involved in matters of public disorder, including a controversial role in the Morant Bay Rebellion, and provided desperately needed assistance after disasters, such as the Kingston earthquake of 1907. They also served in Africa, where they protected British imperial interests, fighting in countless minor engagements like the Ashanti Wars. Caribbean servicemen and women contributed greatly in both world wars, serving in a variety of British regiments, from Europe to the Middle East. Notably, in the Second World War, over 600 Caribbean women volunteered for the Auxiliary Territorial Service, coming to Britain to serve as clerks, drivers, military police, and members of anti-aircraft gun crews. Although the West India regiments have been disbanded, West Indians continue to join the British Army today, from Britain's Caribbean community and the Caribbean itself. The most famous West Indian soldier in recent years is Sergeant Johnson Bahari, born in Grenada, who was awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest decoration for valour, for his actions in Iraq in 2004. The British Army continues to play a role in the Caribbean today, providing assistance after natural disasters such as Hurricane Irma in 2017, and working with local defence forces. Many Caribbean defence forces trace their traditions back to the British Army and the West India regiments.
Antigua and Barbuda was home to the British Army for several centuries. The British Army's traditions and practices were also inherited by our own Antigua and Barbuda Defence Force. Even today, the two military institutions still maintain close relations and cooperate in training and other matters of mutual interest.
West Indian soldiers have ranked amongst the most valiant, gaining 7 Victoria Crosses to date. It is only right and fitting that we remember the West Indian soldier with gratitude for their immense contribution over the past 300 years.